All right, today's workshop is the Web Pond workshop, which has been run every year to introduce everyone to the world of web development. Now, I would like to start off by saying that this workshop was supposed to be run by our tech lead, but unfortunately he fell sick yesterday, so...
And he has COVID.
And so I'm replacing him today. So obviously my experience does not match to his, so I'm going to try my best to give us all an idea of what web development is about. Many of you here have worked on our previous projects, so you're well experienced on that. So if there's something you would like to add to this workshop, feel free to jump in. And yeah, I don't mind you guys shouting out stuff. It's totally fine. We're pretty chill here. So, all right. Yep, this is what we'll be going through in our workshop today. What and why you should consider web development. Some of the frequently asked questions. Basics of web technology, the limitations, and what server-side apps are. So I was going to share a little story. So I learned a bit of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript back in middle school, and I made a few trash-looking websites, and I used to edit some templates and make them look cool. Well, they were already cool, and I did that for a while, and I was like, whoa, this is web development. I'm like, all you have to do is you create a web page and put some information in it, and there you go, you've got a website. And for a while, I thought that was it. That's all web development was. You just create a web page and put information into it. And yeah, when I came over here, when I joined CFC, Friends kind of introduced me to the world of the back end. So I realized that, whoa, there's more to web dev. No way, there's code that runs on a server, and you can use client-side code to communicate with that server. No way, that blew my mind. So yeah, when I joined CFC, Friends was like my master, and I was his Padawan. And yeah, so he really got me into the world of web development. So, and then I found out that it's much more than just websites with information on it. You have a lot of stuff going on, like you have a server that communicates with a database. You have a lot of things can happen on the server, and the server can send information to the code that's running inside your browser. And yeah, it's amazing. So let's get started about web developments. So when we talk about web applications, what are we exactly talking about? So if you've got apps on your computer, you call them desktop applications. If you've got apps on your mobile phone, you call them mobile apps. So that's basically the idea. So web apps are essentially apps that are in the form of a website. And yeah, so web applications typically have a client side and a server side. When I say client side, I'm referring to the code that is intended to run on the browsers of your device. And when I'm talking about server side, I'm referring to the code that runs on the server. And we've got like some sort of architecture that we use for the client side to communicate with the server side. Spoilers, we use APIs. APIs are application programming interfaces. They are basically, think of a hotel with a waiter, and you tell the waiter that you wanna order some food. The waiter goes to the back of the hotel and gets the kitchen working, but you don't really see what's happening in the kitchen. Think of the kitchen as the server, and then the waiter is like the API that sends you that information back, and you as the customer are the client side. So I hope it's a pretty interesting analogy. So why web development? First of all, portability. Many clients ask us why we, well, they don't ask us why we don't make mobile apps, but they want us to make mobile apps. However, we suggest doing web apps because, one, websites can be opened on almost any device with a browser. All you need is a browser on that device. You can use your laptop, your tablet, your phone. And if you really want your web app to be on the Play Store, you can do that nowadays. There's a thing called progressive web apps that lets you install your web apps on phones. We did that with one of our previous projects, Food Bank. You can essentially just, on the browser, there's an option to install the app, and it just gets added to your home screen. If we really wanted, we could put it on the Play Store as well, but that was not a part of the MVP. Yeah, careers and on-demand in job market. So the job opportunities for web developers is pretty massive everywhere, even in Perth. And building connections is a great way to land these opportunities, and also taking part in the projects, which you guys are. So yeah, CFC has been like pretty well known for getting people jobs. Like a lot of people who have participated in our previous projects have landed jobs in many places, like U Group, for example, who sponsored us. I think I mentioned that in every interview that I did. Huge possibility to combine with other emerging technologies. Yeah, for example, web development can play a part in like IoT. So Friends, who is our ex-tech lead, he mentioned one of his projects which involved a sensor that collects data, and then that data gets streamed to a web server, and then that web server renders it to a website. And you can see the data that is read by the sensor on your website. So you can do a lot of things like that. And there was also someone who I interviewed, I think it was James. You did something with a Raspberry Pi and you made a React website, didn't you?
Yeah,
do you want to tell a bit about that?
Sure, okay. I'm doing a side project at the moment where I have a Raspberry Pi, which is self-hosting a website that's connected to some sensors to help control like a barbecue. So I have a charcoal barbecue, and this thing brings the temperature inside the barbecue and off the meat, and then turns the fan on to put more oxygen into the barbecue to increase the temperature. So,
that's fantastic. Yeah, really cool. You can do a lot of stuff, and you can just incorporate web development into it. So yeah, that was the point. And yeah, so IoT, machine learning, there's a lot of Python libraries that are involved for machine learning. I don't really know much about it, but you can write your backend in Python, and then you can incorporate machine learning into your web application. Yeah, and a lot of other technologies include health mining, ONG, etc. Yeah, so let's go to the next slide. So, another slide on careers. So, yeah, when we talk about web development, obviously the first thing that comes to your mind if you've done web development is the front-end development and the back-end development. But the truth is there's actually many other things you can do. For example, a DevOps engineer. There's quite a few jobs there, but this graph here kind of indicates the number of developers. I'm not too sure. Yeah, I think it's like the number of full stack developers and number of back-end developers. So as you see, full stack developers like whopping 28%, and halfway down there is back-end developers, student developers, mobile developers, desktop developers. These are all the occupations that are out there. I don't know why there is front end. Oh wait, no, that's full stack, my bad. So full stack refers to developers who work both on the front end and back end. And yeah, so we also have data scientists, engineering managers. So basically you can see that the web development occupations are like on the top over there, and there's a lot of jobs for web development. So yeah, it's a great industry to get into. And yeah, so Stack Overflow says that, right, no, this was a survey of 50,000 developers. That's cool. I did not make the slides, by the way. So I'm kind of reading it with you guys here. So yeah, the best way to learn web development. Fireship had a really good video. I should have probably linked it here. I might drop it on Discord, but it's worth watching. Yeah, so do personal projects. To-do lists don't count. I'm joking. They do count. They're a great way to learn some of the things that you may have not knew, because like you're putting your skills into application, you know. Like I didn't make a to-do list until I actually did the Agile unit. It's funny because I did Codis for Causes last year. I never made a to-do list because I was on the committee and I got it anyways. So I'm like, in Agile Web we actually had to make a to-do list for the app, and I mean for the exam, and I kind of suffered, not gonna lie, and I'm like, oh, I should have made a to-do list with all the other CFC members. But yeah, and when I actually tried making one, I realized that, hey, there's so much that I didn't know about JavaScript, and I learned a lot in the process. So yeah, making personal projects is a fantastic way. Like, find something fun that you want to make, and then just try making it, because then you'll end up doing a lot of research, which is very important even in your workplace, and you'll actually learn a lot out of it. For example, I really wanted to make a Minecraft server console, a simple console that will just start and stop your Minecraft server. So, and I had no clue how to do that, so I asked people around what would be involved for doing that. Fringe sent me one of his workshop videos from the past where he uses something called WebSockets, which can create a real-time TCP connection that sends information to the server and back from the server. And I was like, oh, this sounds cool. So I searched it up, and yeah, I ended up making this cool little website that I can just press the start button on. It starts my Minecraft server, which is hosted on some server far away. So yeah, you can do anything, something fun like that. If you play games, if you play instruments. Someone mentioned like their project about, was that you? The fretboard Python app? No. Who was that person? Are you here? No. That was you. No, that was not you. That was you. It was you. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Oh, yeah. It was just, I was like, oh, I want to know what fret is what note. You know, instead of counting up, I was like, oh. And I also wanted to like learn what notes sound like at the same time. So I was like, oh, I'll just make a Python app. I had like a dictionary.
That is so cool.
They randomly gave like
yeah.
a fret and a note with it, and you had to guess the note.
Right. And you also made a thing that sorts music into their genres, didn't you?
It was like a music recommendation. It went scraped a website of all these albums, and like it recommended music based on the genre, the years, the
right.
members in it.
Yeah, that is really cool. I actually wanted to make a website or not a website, just a script that scrapes music and sorts it into the genre, so that if I wanted to like learn to play a certain genre of music on my guitar, I can just click on that and then see a list of music. So yeah, that's not a fun project. Someone can do. Do team projects. The benefit of that is you get to read other people's code. Not always a good thing. No, I'm kidding. But when you do that, you get a lot of insight and a new perspective on how to do things. So someone else might have done like a similar problem in a more efficient way, and you could be like, oh yeah, maybe I should have done my problem in that way too. So yeah, you'll learn a lot by doing that, and you get a lot of opportunity to do that in these projects because you'll be working with other people, you will read other people's code when you're reviewing code. So yeah, embrace yourselves. And online courses are a great way. If you guys haven't heard already, GitHub gives students a bunch of free stuff on their GitHub Student Developer Pack, and they give you access to a course called Front-End Masters, which is a website with a lot of master classes by some of the top people out there. And yeah, you can learn some front-end framework or anything related to web dev on there. I highly recommend it. There's also Codecademy and Udacity. I haven't used those in ages, so I don't know how they are nowadays. But yeah, documentation. Reading documentation can be pretty helpful. Yeah, I think last year in winter I fell in love with Mozilla's documentation, MDN. I absolutely loved the way they explained asynchronous JavaScript, because for the longest time I did not understand what that was, and then I just had to read through it, and it was fantastic. So yeah, read documentation. Not all documentation is cool, but there is cool documentation out there. Like if you're working on the ASG app, the Vue framework has a really cool documentation, I hear. So yeah, and also you guys should write documentation too. Reading code written by others, I think we can already mention that. Last, have fun. Yeah, man, just have fun. Make cool stuff. Remember to do that. I think, yeah, Michael has a lot of fun, don't you, Michael?
Yeah. I have fun writing code. That's what I tell people in an interview anyway.
Yeah, no, that's. I remember asking Michael for advice last year. I'm like, hey, Michael, how do I learn, like, I was doing like a math unit. I'm like, hey, how do I learn this in a fun way? And Michael's like, you like coding, right? Then why didn't you code something that relates to your unit? And I thought that was really cool. Never ended up doing it, but I reckon that would have been pretty fun. It's because of my poor time management, but I would have done it if I had a lot of time. So yeah. Basics of web development and limitations. So the three pillars of web development are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So I'm assuming you guys have watched that workshop that was pre-recorded, but HTML is essentially the language that you use to tell the web page how you're going to structure it, what is going to be where on the website. Essentially, you specify that in the HTML files. The CSS is used to style the HTML to make it look pretty, and the JavaScript controls all the logic of your website. So these are the three basic technologies. And you may or may not be surprised to know that we don't directly code in HTML or JavaScript. We use, well, we do, but these aren't the only three things we use in actual jobs nowadays because, first of all, oh wow, I explained it before this slide. But yeah, I pretty much explained this. HTML is the structure, HTML plus CSS makes it pretty, adding JavaScript will make it interactive. And yeah, so HTML doesn't handle repeated content well. You can't have variables or calculations in HTML. So let's imagine I create a nav bar, a navigation bar, the thing you see on the top of most websites in HTML. And I've got a website with multiple pages. Let's say one of the pages is the home page. Let's call it home.html. And I have code for a navigation bar in it. It's a massive chunk of code. And now I've got an about page, about.html. And I want the navigation bar to be in this page as well. So the only way I can get that nav bar in the about.html page is by copying the code inside the home page HTML and then pasting it into the about page. And then that's causing a lot of repetition. And as web developers, we don't want that because we're going to be dealing with jobs where we're implementing new features all the time. So you don't want to keep on copying and pasting code everywhere because then your files are going to get bigger and bigger. So yeah, that's why we don't directly code in HTML. We use frameworks that make our life easier, like React or Vue or Angular. And CSS, well, most CSS is quite similar. So you might want to create really pretty looking buttons. You might want to move a box of content onto the other side of your page or align it a certain way. But the thing is, there is CSS libraries which have already created CSS classes that do that for you, so you don't have to write them from scratch. For instance, we have Bootstrap, we have Tailwind CSS. These are just a bunch of opinions that people had, and they just standardized it into libraries so that you can just access them and use them to make your website without having to deal with too much CSS. And JavaScript adds interactivity to the page. App logic is also handled here. I'm not sure what limitation that point says, but okay, let's go to the next slide. Alrighty, let's talk a bit about frameworks. So some of the frameworks we're dealing with in these projects are React.js and Vue.js. Out of these two, React is basically the most popular framework out there. And yeah, it's more mature and used in industry. When we say more mature, it means that it's been there for a long time. I can't remember when it started, but yeah, it was developed by someone who worked at Facebook, I believe, and then Facebook continued developing it. And yeah, so it's become very popular, and it's a very powerful library as well. And Vue.js is an open source library, and it is growing very fast, and it's becoming really popular to use. Both of them are very good to use and learn. People say that Vue is slightly easier to learn. I personally learned React and went and had a look at Vue and realized how similar they both were. And yeah, so the knowledge is transferable between the two frameworks. So what using a framework does is that, you know how I talked about the navigation bar problem where I'd have to copy the code from the home page HTML into the about page HTML? What these frameworks do is that you create a new file for that navbar component, and you store all the code for the navigation bar into that one file, and then into the file that is responsible for rendering the home page and the about page, you just simply import that navigation bar component file into those files. So, and that reduces the code down to like about one line on each page, and that looks way more cleaner. So essentially, you're dividing your components into separate files and having a file for each component or a group of components. And yeah, it just gives you a much more intuitive file structure, and it's more organized. Yeah, so if we go to the next page. Okay, now we're going to talk about server-side applications and the back end. Personally, I haven't worked on much with the back end. So for Food Bank, I dealt mostly with something called Firestore, which is it's like a database software that is hosted by Google. So we didn't really have a server for the Food Bank project, but if you want to have a server, you would use a framework like Django, which uses Python, or you can have a server which is written in Node.js if you're a JavaScript fan. And yeah, essentially what these servers do is that they can they do the communications with the database, and like if you want to add something to the database and you want these things, these servers are essentially what are going to send this information, like add this information to the database or delete stuff from the database, etc. And on the server, you set up things called API routes. And as I mentioned earlier, APIs are a way for the client side to communicate with the server side. So by setting up API routes on these servers, we're allowing the client to make requests to these servers to do something to the database. So essentially, the server is the thing that is able to fetch data, like take out data from the database and send it to the client. And some of the database softwares we know is PostgreSQL. It's a SQL database. Some other databases are Firestore, which is a NoSQL database, and then there's also MongoDB, which is very popular. Oh, there's PHP over here. PHP is essentially a server-side language. It was used a while ago. I remember learning it, and then it got outdated shortly after, so I never really looked into it anymore. So yeah, what do server-side applications do? Oh, okay, this slide was next. So yeah, serving static front-end web pages. So a lot of times sometimes when you're going onto a website, you want the server to fetch information first and then create this web page and send it to you. So we call these web pages dynamically rendered pages. So for example, if I want to log onto a website that tells me what time it is in the country that the server is, then whenever I make a request to connect to that server, or when I try to go to that website, the first thing the server will do is it will find out what time it is in the place where that server is, and then we will create a web page with that time inside it, and then we'll send it to me, the client. So that's an example of a dynamically rendered website. So yeah, servers can serve dynamically rendered web pages to you, and they can serve static front-end pages too, which means pages that won't change. So if you've got like a index HTML which just says hello, that's never going to change. It sends those to clients as well. But even though that code is stored on the server, it's going to be running in the client. So we refer to the code inside the front-end web pages stuff as the front-end or the client-side code. And yeah, web API, there it is. Right, I think I've talked about this multiple times, so I might just, go over that. So it serves data. Web APIs serve data from the database, and think of API as a waiter in a restaurant. There you go. I mentioned that as an analogy. Yeah, so what are databases? Databases are essentially long-term storage. You can store any sort of information you want. Yeah, and your back end is what is connected to the database. Allows for persistent data storage. Yeah, relational database management systems versus document database management systems. I don't know if you guys have done the relational database management systems unit or not, but these are two different type of databases. In relational database management systems, you would use these ones if you have a lot of complicated queries or relationships between data. And document databases are usually NoSQL, so they're also very easy to scale horizontally. And it depends on what type of application you're trying to build. So yeah, also on document databases, it is difficult to do migrations. Migrations is essentially when you're, if you've got a table of data and you add a new column to it, all the previous records need to be updated to have that extra record in it that you have. And it's pretty difficult to do those on document databases, but it's much easier to do that on relational databases like PostgreSQL. And yeah, so it depends on the type of application you're trying to build. So others I'm not, I don't know what this entails. All right. Languages in web. Yep, so some of the server-side tools that we can use is Django or Flask, and these two are written in Python. And you might have some hands-on experience with Flask if you did the Agile Web Development Unit. If you're working on ASG, you'll be dealing with Django if you decide to work on the back end. Or you can use Node.js or Express as your back-end server, and that's written in JavaScript. Well, it uses JavaScript. Node.js is written in C++, but yeah, it uses JavaScript. And other server-side languages that you can use to build servers are Ruby, Go, Rust, and C. So yeah, I haven't really used these, but I've heard a lot about them. Yeah. Now let's talk a bit about hosting. So you can host your server in many different ways. You can rent a server that runs all the time and just install a web server software on there, like Nginx or Apache, and essentially these things will run your code for you and keep your website up there. Yeah, so if you rent a server, you're gonna have to do all the you're gonna have to deal with all the jazz that involves setting up the web server like Apache Nginx, and you're also gonna have to set up load balancers so that if your traffic increases, you're gonna have to balance the load across multiple servers. And yeah, that can be quite a pain to deal with. So instead of renting a server, you can use a third-party platform like Vercel. What Vercel does is it just deploys your code directly. They don't really give you access to their servers, so you can't really SSH onto the server and host a Minecraft server. But essentially, it links to your GitHub, and then it says, hey, where is your code? Show me your code. And then I click on my code, and it's like, okay, cool, I'm deploying this. Boom, it just gets deployed, and they handle all the load balancing and everything you need to worry about if you had hosted it on your own server. So, yeah. Okay, I think this is referring to hosting a server, like running a physical server device at your home. I don't know why that would be a good idea. Because then you'd have to worry a lot about electricity and stuff like that. So you wouldn't want to do that. I don't
your
think
house
so.
floods and you lose all of your progress.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's true. That's true. They can be like natural disasters. So yeah, it's always best to use a third-party service to rent your server from, because then they're also covering all the maintenance costs and stuff like that, and you don't have to worry about anything like that. So yeah, some of the other hosting services are AWS, Azure. They provide a lot of tools for you. And yeah, there's also Heroku, DigitalOcean, who provide you a lot of cloud containers or something. Alrighty, so CSS frameworks. And yeah, okay. Front end, okay, yeah. So I think it should be called frameworks, not CSS frameworks. But yeah, the frameworks we talked about for the front end are Vue and React. And okay, so these frameworks, they essentially, they're client-side frameworks, but there's a lot of things you have to do to make a full website with them. So essentially, you'd use Vue or React to create single-page web applications. But what if you want to make multiple page web applications? Then there's a lot of things you're going to have to do. You're going to have to install different libraries to get stuff working and set it up so that you can have a multiple-page web app. And yeah, but a lot of developers realize that there's a common pattern to this. Like you install the same libraries every time to turn this into a multiple page web app. So what developers did was they came together and like everyone had a set of opinions. So they standardized these opinions and built frameworks on top of these technologies. So they built Next.js on top of React. So what Next.js is it's a full stack framework which is capable of doing a lot of things. It's able to render pages on the server, like I mentioned earlier. If you want to render the time of the country that the server is physically running in, and then send that to the client, you can do that by server-side rendering. So Next.js allows you to do that, and you can also set up API routes very easily in Next.js. You can also create multiple pages by literally just creating a new file, and whatever you want to name the page, you set that as the name of your file. It makes your life super easy. You don't need to set up routing or anything like that. So yeah, Next.js just makes your life easier, and I'm assuming Nuxt.js works very similar because it was inspired by Next.js, and Nuxt.js is the full stack framework for Vue. So yeah, essentially, if you know React, you can work with Next.js, because all Next.js and Nuxt is it's a set of opinions that people had, and they just built the framework on top of these libraries here. So yeah, front end CSS. Okay, so some of the CSS frameworks that are out there. I mentioned Bootstrap. It's like a bunch of CSS classes that have already been created to make your website look pretty. And then you have frameworks like Material UI and Beautify. So Material UI is for React. It's used to make your React applications look pretty, and it's based off of the material design standard that is set by Google. And Beautify is essentially the same thing but for Vue. And yeah, it's very beneficial to use these libraries because you can specify your color scheme in a config, and that makes it easier to change the color scheme of your web page. Whereas if you had a big CSS file and you wanted to change the color scheme of your website, you're going to have to go through your CSS file and change the colors of each and every component, which can get annoying. So it's very beneficial to use these frameworks instead. And version control. Okay, so I'll just use the typical example. Let's say you're doing a project with 4 people. For example, your Agile web project, and you're supposed to make a chess game app. If there's 4 of you working together, how are you going to write code together? Are you going to send files to each other on Discord? It's like you implement one feature, then you send your friend the file and be like, hey, you complete the rest. Sure, that can work, no doubt. It can work, but it will be very difficult keeping a track of what each person has done, and it will also be inefficient because people can't work at the same time. So what version control softwares allow us to do is they allow us to keep track of what things we have implemented into our app, and it keeps track of the stages of the development. So if you screw up your website, you can roll back to a previous version, and that can be very useful. And Git essentially is what allows people to work together, to collaborate. If you've got your software, like the main code of your software, you're able to create a branch, which is essentially a clone of that code, and you can work on that while your friend creates another branch, and then they work together. And once they've implemented their own features, they can combine that back into that branch, and yep, that's the workflow that Git provides you, and it's super helpful because multiple people can work at the same time, and you're able to keep a track of who's doing what. And yeah, some of the other things Git allows you to do, well, not Git. Git is the thing that allows you to do the version control, but GitHub is the thing that will allow you to have a proper workflow. So whenever you've worked on your branch, you have to do something called a pull request, and GitHub facilitates this for you. So a pull request entails someone from your team has to do a code review on the code that you've written, and if it looks good, then they will allow the merge to happen. If it doesn't look good, they'll be like, hey, your branch is a bit messed up. You need to go and make some changes to it. Throwbacks to food bank.
That's it.
Oh, well, that's it? All right, we got through this. Does anyone have any questions? No? No questions regarding web development? Cool. I hope you guys have a fantastic experience in this project. There's a lot to learn. There's things that I haven't even covered in the slides, but yeah, there's going to be a lot of research you guys are going to have to do because you're going to find out a lot of problems, some things you might not understand. Don't be afraid to ask any one of us any questions. Don't be afraid to search on Google. That's like, you'll be doing that even when you have a job. So yeah, have fun, really. And yeah, thanks for attending the workshop today.